We're ready for large presenter. Very welcome to William from Velux. He will present how they use the internal marketplace. It's all yours.
Yeah, cool. I suppose you can hear me. I'm William. I'm a data platform engineer at Velux, and today I'll be talking a bit about how we at Velux use Snowflake's new internal marketplace to enable cross-domain sharing of data products. The agenda is a bit about Velux and the bright future we have ahead of us in the data space. I'll then be talking a bit about the traditional data sharing challenge, the whole silo thing, and how having a data mesh approach to things solves that. And that's where Snowflake's internal marketplace comes in. I'm hoping most of this presentation is going to be a demo where we're going to mess around in Snowflake and see if it works. And then it should be noted that we at Velux have chosen to use dbt as our main transformation engine for all ELT. So effectively, dbt is governing most of our Snowflake objects, which is why I'll spend a bit of time on how we've managed to implement Snowflake Marketplace as a part of the dbt workflow. So that inevitably leads to more demo, and then hopefully we have time for some questions. Cool. So let's start with a quick introduction to Velux. As many of you probably know, we're a global leader in roof windows and skylights. For decades, we've been committed to bringing fresh air and daylight into people's homes. And that's actually where the name Velux comes from. It's a combination of ventilation and lux, or air and light. But enough about windows. So the data space, historically, Velux has almost completely outsourced all of their data operations, and that was manageable for a bit of time. But as the demand grew, and POCs, or projects that started as POCs, became more and more relied upon by business to be stable and production ready, kind of quickly figured out that it probably makes sense to start internalizing some of this. And so we started internalizing the knowledge, and that's when I got hired a year ago. We started reconsidering the tech stack, aiming for more modern and interoperable technologies, and basically ended up trying to establish a modern self-serve data platform. We've always wanted to try and build ownership, so really taking data mesh seriously in the business, driving domain autonomy, and hopefully through that kind of increasing data literacy, which basically led us to build the new data platform called Reflect. Yeah, you can think a bit about that one. The most important part of a modern data platform is this concept of data products. And that's what I'll be talking to you about today, and how we've managed to find a nice solution for that in the internal marketplace. Cool. So one of the many things having a data mesh inspired solution solves is the traditional problem of data sharing. And I'll quickly go through some of the main hurdles we have here, where in the traditional approach, each business domain kind of fends for itself. Firstly, you're going to find a lot of data silos. And most alarmingly, you're going to find data silos between business domains that are very close in sourcing the same information, but slightly changing the logic. So that's why you get duplicate connectors out there. You get the same transformations over and over again, and duplicate logic essentially to report on some of the same dashboards and actionable insights. Obviously, this leads to a lot of duplicate data, but also very unclear data ownership. And that's why you lose this data lineage from the technical owners of the source systems. All of a sudden have no idea what data is out there being exposed and how it's being used. And And that makes it almost impossible to enforce any sort of complex compliance requirements you might have from the source systems, and also leads to this difficult balance between granting access and then maintaining these security policies downstream in the analytics plane. And all of this, of course, the whole siloed approach leads to a lot of increased storage and processing cost. So what's the solution? Well, one solution is data mesh. And data mesh, for those of you who don't know, basically boils down to 4 main concepts. First one is domain ownership. We have 2 domains here. In data mesh, each business domain, whether it be marketing, operations, sales, they own their own data. And that means they're responsible for managing, storing, and transforming their own data without having to rely on anyone else in a centralized team. Next, which is important for this talk, is the concept of data as a product. And in this model, you're basically treating data as exactly that. And that means ensuring that your data is discoverable, it's usable, and it's reliable, just like any product you'd offer a customer. Third, my favorite, being a platform engineer, is self-serve data infrastructure. And that's basically allowing us to enable these business domains to operate autonomously, be able to maintain their pipelines end-to-end without having to rely on others. And finally, we have the federated governance. Despite decentralizing ownership, governance still remains somewhat important. We need to ensure that data quality and standards are kind of consistent across the organization. Yeah. What we'll be talking about today is how we enable this part, so being able to share these data products across domains in a nice way. And for that, we use Snowflake Internal Marketplace. And this is basically a curated, secure, I'm reading from the documentation now, curated, secure environment for collaborative data sharing within an organization, but also outside. Basically embodies a lot of the data mesh principles we've adopted and are interested in. And it allows for our consumers in the business to have a robust platform for data product management and discovery. The core concept behind the internal marketplace and the listing is this idea of Snowflake shares. There's a small diagram here we'll return to, but basically it's a mechanism that allows you to securely share data, and it's a read-only version of it. Basically, it boils down to mutable access. So when you share a share with the consumer, they're only able to read from that. Being Snowflake, they also double down on the whole zero-copy cloning. So when you're sharing your data, you're not actually copying or moving any data. What's happening is you're referencing the data where it lives in your account. And also, Snowflake being Snowflake, you're able to do some pretty granular permissions. We have an example here where we have the provider account. In database 1, we want to create a share with usage to DB1 and select to the table, the blue table in schema A. That's what we share in the share. Consumer accounts then consume this, and they're only able to see this exact table. And it's essentially a reference to that exact data. See a more complicated example over there, but the idea kind of remains. Cool, so that's the share. Now the listing part of it, I tend to think of it as a wrapper around this share concept. And it basically allows you to kind of publish these shares so that they're discoverable within your organization. Previously, Snowflake's always had this, but it's always been across accounts or across organizations. Nice thing about the internal marketplace is they've now been able to do this within an account, an organization for that matter. If you look at it a bit from the producer-consumer side of things, it kind of allows your producers to create and publish these data products. define the access controls, you set usage, SLAs, and you can monitor consumption. On the consumer perspective, you kind of have a one-stop shop to discover all the data products in your organization. You can even request access to data that might be discoverable, but where you don't currently have access. And you can kind of integrate data products that have been tested into your own analytics environment. Cool. So let's see how this actually looks. So if I go somewhere, here we go. If I go into Snowflake here, hopefully this looks familiar to a lot of you, but you'll see there's this tab over on the left-hand side called Data Products. First place you'll end up is the marketplace. And this is the general marketplace where you're able to share data products across accounts. The interesting new feature is this little tab up here, the internal marketplace. And this is where we're able to share our data products with all our different domains, and where any consumers would be able to search for data in the Velux organization. So if I'm interested in something like vouchers, I can see we have a data product here, and I can also see it's instantly accessible. That's back to the zero-copy cloning. When I open it up, I'll see there's very limited documentation, which is nice. But there's a data dictionary. I'm able to see exactly what's in this data product. It can work across schemas. It can also work across databases. It gets a bit funky when you have views that aren't secure. So I recommend sticking to a single database. But you kind of, you're able to preview some data, get some documentation. And then down here, you're actually also able to specify usage examples. So say we had a complicated data product here where it's important to know how you join and what you join on and how you aggregate. You're able to do this. This is super neat because when I want to see how this works, I can press this button. We'll see what happens. Just want to say, now that Snowflake has enabled secondary roles, super difficult for me to demo the consumer side. Me being the global org admin, I can kind of see everything. But if I was a role that didn't have access to this data product, but I had it in my discoverable feed, be able to see all the same things here, but this little button would change to request access. What that does is basically, in our setup, it would send an email to an external consultant, which is neat. But it would send an email to your listing request approver, and they would have to actively go in and grant you access. You can also use, I believe they have a flow within Snowflake as well, so you can start approving requests in there as well. But now you'll see if I press query in the worksheet, it looks like this, and it pops up with your first usage example, which is super neat. So off the bat, directly able to query this data and start working with it. You'll also notice that it spawned a third tab up here. You're probably used to databases worksheets. It now introduces this data product notion. And basically what this does, again, I'm admin, so I have access to all our data products. You would obviously only see your own. But here I can see all the data products that are shared in Velux. And I'm able to query these completely as if they were databases. And that's where this funky identifier comes in. It's called a universal listing locator. I think of it as a pseudo database. Works in the exact same way. Cool. So that's a bit about that. If you were to actually create this, I would recommend Snowsite UI to start with. And the way it works is on the provider studio side of things, you simply press create listing for internal marketplace. There's probably some roles you have to enable somewhere. but that can be read in documentation. But the idea here is then get this blank sheet, and you can kind of type your way through all of this. Adding the data product, that goes back to the Snowflake share we just had. And essentially, when I'm adding data here, let's see if we can find something. I can add all of the tables or just one. I can go cross database. But when I save here, it's going to create a share in the background. And this is then what this listing is wrapped around. This is also where I control access. So I can give the entire organization access, or I can choose accounts within my organization that I'd like to grant access to, and which roles within that account. That should be able to see this. So that would probably be some reporting role somewhere. That's kind of how that works. When you have discovery, that was this where you can actively request access, still see it, but not have direct access to the data. And when you choose this, then you also have to add an approver contact, and that's the person you contact in order to get access. Cool. The way it works is you kind of create all these shares. These were all the shares we had listings for. And they basically point to these different databases. And the way you actually choose the permission side is your standard grants. So you grant usage on the database, the schema, and then which tables you want to grant access to. Creating the listing, behind the scenes, it's just a big manifest YAML file. So if you get that, it's pretty stateful, and we'll see how that works with the whole DBT aspect of things. But then you can update accesses here, who gets access, how it's discoverable, stuff like this. Cool. So as I said, most of our Snowflake items are DBT controlled and owned. And that means in order to effectively roll this out, you saw there was a lot of clicking, and it's very difficult to control governance. And me being a platform engineer, want to shut down on governance. So what we've chosen is to try to integrate this way of sharing data into the day-to-day operations of our analytics engineers. And basically, it's an attempt at trying to abstract all of this away and make it super seamless in terms of whenever they're writing their exposures anyway in DBT. By adding just a bit of extra metadata, we're actually able to start publishing these data products. And there are two sides. On the producer side, I've created a macro. Basically, what the macro does is it automates the creating of listings from DBT project models. So if you know what the exposures YAML file is from DBT, it's basically adding a bit of metadata there, and then it will know exactly where these DBT refs are located and start creating the share, granting access to the share, and then creating the listing on top of that. Nice thing about that is you're able to have one source of truth to some extent. With something called persist docs, also from DBT, you're actually able to push all the metadata you have in DBT anyway out into Snowflake. And that's how we populate a lot of the documentation and the table descriptions, column descriptions into Snowflake, so that Snowflake Internal Marketplace becomes the one-stop shop for the consumers to start finding information. But on the producer side, all you have to do is just add a couple extra metadata. Consumer side gets a bit funky because when creating this listing, DBT has no idea what I'm doing. So the lineage across projects is all of a sudden lost because you're essentially granting access to the share and not the underlying database. So when I'm in my new DBT project, and I try to cross-project reference, I'm going to try to hit the database which my role doesn't have access to. So in order to get around that, and that's the whole org data listing $ internal database, I have modified the ref function in dbt so that when it is a cross-project reference, it checks whether a listing exists, and then it will modify the database to the org listing name. And the nice thing about that is you get the best of both worlds. You get the Snowflake Internal Marketplace, but you also get the cross-project lineage from dbt. Cool. Let's take a look at how that looks, if this works. Nice. So if I go, maybe we start in code, and maybe we open something up here. So if, I don't know how many know dbt in here, but dbt is basically just a lot of SQL files and a lot of YAML on top. There's a concept of an exposure where you basically group together some dbt models and say, I have this thing here. This thing depends on all these upstream data models. And that allows you to be able to track whenever anyone's changing any of those upstream models, you know exactly what it's going to impact downstream. What I've done here is basically just add this meta key. Now I'm able to add information that goes directly to the Snowflake listing. So that's stuff like the featured models you wanted in your data dictionary in the first pane, the usage examples. So this goes directly into Snowflake as well. That's what you press. You can spawn open the worksheet. And the really neat thing is access controls. Now, at Velux, we manage all roles and access through Terraform, but being able to access the final data product access, manage that in dbt is super neat because, again, we're able to kind of decentralize that and let the business domains choose for themselves in some sense. So that's really all you need to do. There is massive caveats in all of this. One is dbt has no idea about metadata when you share across projects. So there are some pretty strict assumptions around, for instance, you'll notice digital C is written a lot of places. And that's because the name of the exposure and the name of the schema has to be the exact same for me to figure out what organizational listing we're talking about when modifying the ref function downstream. For those of you interested, the macro, it's okay simple. Basically just goes through the dbt graph, sees if there's any exposures that end in data product, and then it kind of fetches out all the information I would need. So stuff like the description is nice, owners, models, all the config that's saved in meta, that was all the information I needed. A potential share name to create. And then I'd simply loop through all of this, create the shares, kind of grant usages on the databases and schemas, grant select on the individual objects, and then start preparing this YAML config file or the YAML manifest for the listing. And that then gets fired away and gets built in Snowflake. The ref side of things was a bit funky. I wouldn't recommend just changing the ref function. It gets called quite a lot in dbt. But basically what it does is whenever there's a package name, so when you're cross-project referencing, you're going to go in and see, hey, I know I'm in this schema. Let me just check if there is a existing listing. That's called that. And that's why the schema name becomes super important. If it does, it replaces the path. simply replaces the database with this, and you're good to go. So how does that look in dbt? If we just take a domain, then search, I think, if we search vouchers again, we'll probably see, have a voucher dashboard here. We can see it's cross, so we're actually managing to keep the cross-project lineage, which is neat. So here we can see where it's actually coming from another domain, how it's being built. Now I completely lost the model, 2 seconds. Yeah, what I wanted to show here is if we press on one of these models and look at the code, we can see it's referring to another domain given model. But if I look at the compiled version of this, it's gone in and replaced the database with the org data listing. And that means all the accesses you granted here also just flow through the entire system. So that's super neat. It also means stuff like you can start having not only SLAs, but also contracts between your data products, where it's impossible to break anything downstream, which is also pretty neat when you start kind of enabling this whole ecosystem of data products all over. Quickly becomes pretty dangerous to start changing things that could break a lot of stuff. But you'll notice if I try, now I think I removed a column somewhere. And if I try to build that model, it'll say, hey, you actually removed this column here. You're breaking the contract. You're not allowed to do this. You have to create a new version and then expose this new version instead. Yeah. Cool. I have no more besides questions. Yes. I don't know if I throw a cube or how this works. I'll try and walk down.
Super cool presentation, thanks. I have not seen the listings before, but it's super cool to see these in action. I have a question when you're creating the listings. On dbt, you often rewrite tables on every run. I mean, sometimes you're using incremental updates, but often enough, at least I know, that especially the very far downstream models, it's easier to actually rewrite them. How does this work with the shares and the listings and the sharing? Do you have to recreate those as well?
Yeah. So the neat thing is I can check if it exists. So all I have to do is kind of alter the listing. And that's what I do. If the listing exists, I can alter it. That's also how we maintain access control. dbt or Snowflake now knows exactly what it has to recreate. And it's typically done within the same transaction again as well. So you don't lose any time there. But we only build it when it's in production. So when the target is prod, and it only gets run on end as well. But it's true, on end, it would loop through and look for all your data products and then update them all.
Do you see any increase in cloud costs when you have to run all these listing updates, elders, create, whatever?
No, compared to both how small, or we only have 16 data products today. Okay. And the nice thing about shares is it's not actual data manipulation in any sense. It's just fancy metadata you're creating. So in terms of compute time as well, it takes no time to actually build this. So I wouldn't think so.
Thanks.
I think it's really good presentation, William. One question to you: have you considered dbt contracts? All that universe, and I can see you're not using it. So what is the reason for not using it?
We are using it. Okay. It's just hidden in one of my many YAML files. Let me just see. So if we take the example of the vouchers, we've kind of looked a bit at, seen public models here. And this is why I wasn't allowed to change anything. We have, for each of the models I'm sharing in my data product, I specify the schema in the contract and the differences between versions. If I were to publish a new version of my data product, I would say, hey, version 2, I actually renamed store name to, or the other way around. Yeah, other way around. I renamed shop name to store name. And that, another super neat thing is through the share, we create, that's another macro. I have a lot of macros, but it creates a latest version view. So when you hook this up to some Power BI, and you're on a model that didn't have versions before, and now all of a sudden you're creating versions with underscore v1 and v2, this macro creates a view that selects the latest version, so that you don't have to update all your Power BI references or downstream references when you start introducing this. Cool. No more questions? Well, thank you.